In 2008, I was in the middle of an exciting yet scary part of my life. I had just left my old law firm. I had actually started my own law firm, and I was now at this point where I was seeing what it was like to be a business owner. And fortunately for me, I was blessed because my mentor, the late Larry Hardaway, a prominent attorney in Bartow, Florida, allowed me the opportunity to share space in his office. So this made it possible for me to open up my doors with almost no overhead. This was great. Now, also, I had a unique advantage because Bartow, Florida, for those of you who may be familiar with it, is nestled in the heart of Polk County, Florida, which is one of the largest counties in the state of Florida. As such, I had to commute back and forth from Polk County to my house in Poinciana, Florida, which was in Osceola County. So it was about a good hour-long drive every day. And this became my new routine as I started my new practice. Now, I've shared this with you guys countless occasions. I'm from Arkansas, so I'm used to backwater driving. I love back roads and maneuvering and so forth like that. I used to drive those roads on a regular basis back to Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana. So I was very comfortable with driving those roads. And as fate would have it, to get from my home to Bartow, Florida, I had to basically cut through almost a good 6 or 7 little small towns and a boatload of country roads to get there. But again, as I indicated before, this wasn't a problem for me. So it was not uncommon for me to get on the road at about 6:30 in the morning, wind through various towns, whether it be Haines City, Winter Haven, things of that nature, and just kind of maneuver on down as I made it close to Bartow, Florida. And this was my routine, 6:30 in the morning, and then at 5 o'clock in the evening. And this was the way I maneuvered. And again, wasn't a problem for me because I was used to it. In my mind, I'm a good old country boy. I'm used to driving back roads. What is the problem? But one day, when I was in the office, I had the opportunity to speak with a young lady who was Larry Hardaway's secretary. And we were talking, and she's a young lady. She's in her 20s, and I'm about in my 40s and so forth. And she turns to me, and she just out of the blue just asked me, she's like, "Hey, how do you go home?" And so she knew I was at Poinciana, and so I gave her the route that I took when I went home. And so she, in the course of talking, she says, "When you go through this particular town, I'm going to need you to slow down a little bit." And so I'm like, why would I slow down? In my mind, I'm thinking I slow down when I go through all these towns because I know what it is to go through speed traps and everything like that. But I was a little curious because she was very specific about saying this one, not the other little towns, because I maneuver all through the place and so forth in terms of taking reroutes to different areas and so forth like that. But invariably, I would always cut through this one town because it was just easier. And I turned to her and I was like, why? What's wrong with that town? And then she turns to me and she says, because the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan lives there. And I paused. And I had to really wrap my brain around what she was saying. I'm like, wait a minute. In 2008, not saying that the organization has completely disappeared, but it was interesting to note she knew specifically where the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan actually lived. And she just told me, just be mindful that he lives in that little town. Now, for those of you who've served in the military, there's a phrase that we often utilize. It calls trust but verify. That's a nice way of saying that I'm going to trust what you're saying, but I'm just going to verify. Not saying that you're lying. I just want to confirm that that's what you're saying. So, of course, I turned to a few of my older mentors, including Larry Hardaway, and including a few other persons who actually grew up in Polk County as well as Bartow, and I asked them about this. And they all said the same thing, like, oh yeah, it's not a secret. It's well known amongst individuals that the Grand Dragon lives there. And it was funny because the moment I mentioned that I drove through there, they all stopped and they said, just make sure you slow down. And it was funny because they weren't telling me that the entire police force or the entire government was Klan or anything like that. They just said, just be mindful of the fact that there is a presence, because if you've got a Grand Dragon there, it's a fairly decent likelihood that there is a prominent presence of the Klan in that area. So they were just telling me, be mindful. You don't have to do anything different from what you normally do. Just be mindful when you go through that area that the Grand Dragon lives there. And it's important to understand because at this point in my life, it's not about telling you, oh my God, you need to be petrified. It's about recognizing that we now move in these spaces where not all the time do we know where the dangers were because they weren't always clear and present. So as such, when I was getting this information, not only from the young lady, as well as my other mentors, They were just telling me, here's information that you need to be mindful of. Do with it as you will. This is not intended to scare you. It's just merely to put you on notice. But here was the thing that impacted me the most. It was the fact that she told me. Now, some of you are going to say, oh, like it was a woman. No. I had gotten these types of feedbacks before from my peers in Generation X or from my mentor or my mother's generation of baby boomers. So someone who had grown up, hearing their parents talk about this in real time, or your parents experiencing this in real time is one thing. This young lady was a millennial. In theory, she was, at the time, we're talking the mid-20s is when she was born. The mid-80s is when she was born, which literally means she was a good decade or so away from it in terms of when she was born, and more so, she was a good 2 decades away from it by the time she became an adult. But she still knew about this particular danger enough to be able to communicate it to me. That hit a little differently. Now, there are going to be people who want to start running and screaming saying, oh, it's once in the end, your parents and grandparents probably poisoning the well. You can call it what you want, but the simple reality is that it wasn't that she knew this. All these other people I engaged who did not even know her knew it as well. And the fact that she knew it was a powerful point to me that even she, at such a young age, was made to be aware of where the dangers were, even if they weren't clear and present. It was at this point that I realized at the end of the day, generational awareness knows no timeline. It doesn't matter if you're a boomer or a millennial or Gen X or Gen Z. Especially as we started moving in this period, and I have said this in countless videos, we often overlook that from 1619 to 1968, the dangers were clear and present. They were institutional, they were in the agencies, they were in the culture. But when 1968 happened and we proceeded into the 70s and so forth, there was this ongoing narrative that was pushed that the dangers were no longer there. But we, as Black people, knew they were. We just didn't know what form they took. So part of that form was being made aware of the fact of where dangers could possibly arise so that we could be aware of them ahead of time. This was a powerful thing to know and a powerful thing to learn. And this was something that I am glad I had the opportunity to be exposed to. And it made me realize, just from interacting with her, how important it is to share information regardless of the generation. So this way we can learn accordingly. I can't stress this enough because so many times we hear people talking about, why are you bringing up the past? Because you're trying to divide us. Why are you being a victim? Why are you sitting here trying to re-traumatize it? And I have to remind people over and over again, this is not about projecting, oh, I was so harmed. It was about information. This was not about me traumatizing and terrorizing or dividing. This was about providing history. Let's just be clear. That person was physically there. They didn't do anything to me. But remember, we literally just came out of a generation where people were literally harmed regardless. And this is the other thing that we often fail to realize. Even as we segued in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s, there were still incidences that occurred. There were still episodes where Black people found themselves in devastatingly harmful situations. And we need to stop acting as if these are always going to be exceptions. Remember, hearts and minds didn't change overnight. It takes about a generation or two before you can kind of purge all those things out. And as long as there are people who are willing to poison future generations, you have to be mindful of that. So again, this is just an important thing to recognize that in this instance, I was being shared information by someone who learned information herself. And she wanted me to be aware so I could move accordingly. Not to jump back, not to be scared, not to be like, oh my gosh, but just to be mindful of the fact that, hey, if you don't know where the clear and present dangers are, this might be one. Move accordingly. And let's just be clear. I still drive through Polk County. So I don't want anybody to think that this is my way of saying, oh, you should never go through Polk County or this one town. No. I drove through for a good 7 to 8 years, never had an incident and so forth like that. It's important because this is no different from anybody telling you to be mindful of a speed trap or be mindful of the fact that there's gas stations going to close. This is information that you have that you should process accordingly. I learned early on as I moved into this new generation, which is why I wrote the book Traveling Why Black Generation X, is that as we moved in these spaces where there weren't always clear indications of where the dangers were, Sharing knowledge with each other became a crucial part of this process. And I hope you got something from this as well. How many of you had to go through this experience where even you were surprised that somebody younger than you knew where the dangers were when you didn't know? Share below, subscribe, like. I always look forward to hearing from you. Take care.